Across the Flow FM network, a Flow News 24 update.
It's Wayne with you at the Flow News desk, and we're looking at agriculture. We're talking now about legislation introduced by Water Minister Tanya Plibersek into Parliament that effectively will increase water buybacks in the Murray-Darling Basin. And the National Farmers Federation has said that the water bill is a recipe for hurt, division and higher food prices. The Chief Executive, Tony Marr, said the proposal would blow up the Basin plan, destroy trust and livelihoods for Basin communities. The plan has been brokered a decade ago, including clear limits on the harm that could be inflicted on Basin towns. Farming communities went along with the plan and suffered the pain of buybacks based on those promises. But now this bill seeks to tear up the previous promises. I thought we'd then look at the release from the New South Wales Irrigators Council, and they present a range of views which I think need to be discussed. And in particular, they talk about the water recovery. They say that with 98% of the surface water buybacks already complete and sustainable diversion limits now in place, that the Murray-Darling Basin now has just 28% of inflows diverted, with 72% remaining in rivers. And that's globally recognised as a world-leading reform. So the problem here is that we've got water that has been stopped, if you like, from on the surface. Those have been looked at. Surface water buybacks have been done. There's very, very little that can be gained now from buying more water back from the surface water that flows out of tributaries into the main river system of the Murray-Darling Basin. So they also go on to say that to date, 2,107.4 gigalitres have been recovered. It exceeded the 2,075 gigalitre target. Data shows that all valleys are now not only compliant with the SDLs, but have a chronic trend of underusage. And so that the government, in effect, is pushing away to take more water out of the system from farmers who actually now use water on that surface of it, that is those that irrigate, that then pump water out of the irrigation system back into their land, that the government wants to take those water licences away in order to still make up the extra 450 gigalitres that has been required for South Australia's environment circumstances. Now, of course, we're not in a drought at the moment, and we have been previously, so back from 2004 and 2008, a major drought occurred through much of South Australia, and water was at a very large shortage in Adelaide at the time. There were water restrictions for properties. Trees were just dying in our gardens. I recall it well. We weren't allowed to water. We couldn't even wash our cars with a hose. We were bucket washing and all of those sorts of things at the time as part of the concern over the amount of flows. But the Basin plan to date, reports the New South Wales Irrigator, has increased water for rivers to 72% of inflows while costing small towns more than 3,100 jobs. Now, they go on to say the new Basin plan is very far from the spirit and the law of the 2012 plan. And this is the key thing, that if we move towards a greater amount of water buybacks, then each time a buyback happens, towns that are in that vicinity, and we're talking little places here across the Murray-Darling Basin. When you talk about where these tributaries are, you talk about places with 50 people. But with those jobs that go in that area, with the lack of water for those farms, that means that jobs get lost every time a water licence is bought back and that water is forced down the river for flows. And Claire Miller from the New South Wales the Irrigators Council further adds, as did the National Farmers, that higher input costs lead to higher costs for food and fibre. They result in increased costs at the checkout, and at the same time, less water means less food and fibre grown. That puts pressure on prices. So has Tanya Plibersek, her new bill that she's introduced, has she gone straight to it in order to get more buybacks into the system? Have they counted the impact on these rural electorates? Remembering these rural electorates are National Party and Liberal Party held electorates that are affected. In South Australia, there are a couple of Liberal electorates that are affected in the context of this, but in reality, it's the New South Wales and Northern Victoria electorates that are far greater affected, many and most held by the Nationals. There's some independent held and also some Liberal held too, with the seat of Farrer to the member for Farrer, which is Susan Lee. So I'm looking at this and going, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more at stake for small country towns. There's a lot more at stake for producing food and fibre within the basin where water is paramount and irrigation is necessary. And if those licences are sold for water to be pumped out down the river system out of the mouth, then one has to ask whether they've got the balance right, and particularly whether they're balancing this right across, say, a drought period or a period of good rainfall. These are the questions that the government has used data, their own data from the Australian Bureau of Agriculture and Resource Economics and Sciences. That they've also talked about these water buybacks, that they've already driven the water allocation prices in 3 of the last 10 years to $200 a megalitre more, and that is above the price to which it was. So this gets to be a very real problem for farmers. And with the Tanya Plibersek bill, I think there's going to be more protests from farmers. We're not going to just see tractors at Parliament House. We may see large-scale water tankers and so on, because that's the way that some of these areas, without water being available for irrigation, for food and so forth, people are going to be looking at leaving the land, and land will just become back to salt bush and so forth, which I don't think is a sensible idea when we're trying to feed more people, not only here and abroad.
A Flow News 24 update.